For a second, it looked like just another late-night interview. Bright lights, big smiles, rehearsed jokes. But the moment Jimmy leaned forward, card trembling just a little in his hand, something in the room shifted, like everyone knew this next question wasn't part of the script. Part 1, the question that wasn't on the card. The audience was still laughing from a silly game they'd just played. That kind of noisy, easy laughter that fills every corner of the studio. Cameras floated on their tracks, the band tuned down into a soft groove, and the city glowed behind them in fake skyline perfection. Jimmy adjusted his tie, glanced at the cue cards, then, almost like changing his mind mid-breath, slipped one of the cards under his leg. The smile on his face stayed, but his eyes suddenly looked different, more present, almost nervous. Across from him, Keanu sat relaxed, hands folded loosely, the hint of a shy smile on his face. He just finished telling a funny story about a stunt gone wrong, and the crowd had eaten it up. But now, as the laughter faded, he noticed the way Jimmy's fingers tightened around the remaining card. The lights above them hummed quietly. The studio, built for noise and applause, began to feel strangely intimate, like a living room where two people were about to talk about something that actually mattered. Jimmy glanced toward the band, then back at Keanu. "You know," he said, his voice just a little softer than before, "we talk a lot about movies and action scenes and all that stuff." He hesitated, the way someone does when they're about to cross a line they're not sure they should cross. Keanu tilted his head, curiosity flickering in his eyes. The audience, sensing the shift, went still. A few people in the front row leaned forward, phones half raised, not wanting to miss whatever was about to happen. For a heartbeat, it looked like Jimmy might back out. He tapped the edge of the card against his knee, glanced toward the producers behind the cameras, then took a breath and ignored them. "I've always wanted to ask you something," he said, "but not as a host, as a person." The words hung there, fragile and honest. Keanu's smile faltered into something more thoughtful. This wasn't the setup for a joke. This was something else. The cameras closed in, lenses whispering as they zoomed, framing every nuance of Keanu's face. You could almost feel millions of viewers at home shifting in their seats, sensing an unscripted moment in a world that almost never allows them. Jimmy looked down just once, then met Keanu's eyes with a quiet seriousness that even the bright studio lights couldn't wash out. "What," Jimmy asked, his voice steady but low, "do you think happens to us when we die?" The words landed like a weight in the center of the room. A couple of nervous laughs fluttered from the back of the audience and died out instantly. The band fell completely silent. Even the air seemed to pause. Keanu didn't move at first. He just breathed in, slow and careful, as if he understood exactly how much this question cost to ask and how much it might cost to answer. Behind his calm expression, something deeper stirred, memories, old grief, pieces of a life that the world only thought it knew from headlines and interviews. In that moment, under the harsh studio lights and in front of strangers watching from their couches, he wasn't an action star or a meme or a legend. He was just a man being asked to speak about the one thing that terrifies almost everyone: the end. He lowered his gaze for a second, and when he looked up again, his eyes were shining in a way that had nothing to do with the cameras. His lips parted like he was about to answer, then closed again as he searched for words that wouldn't sound fake or rehearsed. The audience waited, caught between fear of the question and hunger for the truth. And as the silence stretched, Jimmy realized Keanu's answer might not only change the mood of the show, it might change something inside every person who was about to hear it. Keanu let the silence breathe, not rushing to fill it the way most guests did. His fingers interlaced on his lap, knuckles whitening just a little as he pressed his hands together. For a few seconds, he didn't look at Jimmy or the cameras or the audience. He stared past them into a place only he could see. It wasn't the look of someone trying to come up with a clever answer. It was the look of someone fighting through memories sharp enough to cut. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than before, slightly rough at the edges. "That's not a simple question," he said almost to himself, "even though it sounds like one." The audience, usually eager to laugh at any opening, stayed quiet. There was something in his tone that told them this moment wasn't for jokes. Jimmy swallowed, letting him have the space, his usual quick wit folding into a quiet, almost protective patience. Keanu lifted his eyes and met Jimmy's, and for a heartbeat you could see the conflict there. Part of him wanted to keep his walls up, to protect the pieces of his past he carried like scars under a shirt. Another part of him, the part that had grown tired of pretending loss didn't hurt, seemed ready to set something down, even if only for a minute. He took another breath, steady but tremoring just slightly on the exhale. "You know," he said, "I've lost people I loved, people I thought I'd grow old with." The words were simple, but they hit the room like a confession. A few people in the audience shifted, eyes softening, recognizing that kind of pain in themselves. Keanu wasn't naming names, and he didn't have to. Anyone who'd followed his life even a little knew pieces of his story. The tragedy, the headlines, the way he'd always carried his grief quietly, never using it as a performance. Jimmy's expression changed from curiosity to something gentler, something closer to respect. He wasn't just hosting anymore, he was listening, really listening. The control room might have been screaming in his ear to move it along, to lighten the mood, but he ignored whatever was buzzing in his earpiece. He leaned back, giving Keanu room. "You don't have to answer," Jimmy said softly. "Not if it hurts too much." Keanu gave the faintest hint of a smile, but it was a tired one, like someone who's learned that pain is not something you escape, only something you learn to live beside. "It does hurt," he admitted. "But that's kind of the point, isn't it?" His eyes drifted over the crowd. "We're all walking around pretending this question isn't chasing us. Then one day it catches up and suddenly it's not theoretical anymore." The truth of that landed. You could see it on faces in the front row, a young woman twisting a ring on her finger, an older man blinking more than usual, a couple exchanging a quick, fragile glance. Keanu wasn't playing for sympathy. He was just naming something everyone felt, and almost no one ever said out loud on television. He shifted in his chair as if adjusting the invisible weight on his shoulders. "When you lose someone," he continued, "it's like the world keeps moving, but a part of you stays right where they disappeared. You're walking, talking, doing interviews, signing autographs. But inside, a part of you is frozen in that one moment, asking the same question over and over. Where did they go? Are they okay? Did they just stop?" His voice cracked just enough on that last word to make the air tighten. Jimmy's eyes glistened, not with the exaggerated, theatrical emotion late-night TV sometimes likes, but with the stunned empathy of someone who suddenly realizes this conversation is bigger than ratings or clips. He glanced briefly at the audience, then looked back, almost as if silently telling Keanu, "I'm here. Keep going if you can." Keanu blinked slowly, collecting himself. "I used to think courage was jumping off buildings for a stunt," he said with a faint, self-conscious laugh. "Now I think courage is just getting up the next day when you do know why you should, answering questions like this when every part of you wants to hide." His fingers loosened a little. You could feel him teetering on the edge between retreat and revelation. He paused, eyes shining now, not from the lights, but from something raw and unguarded underneath. "So when you ask me what happens when we die," he said, his voice barely above a murmur, "I don't hear a philosophical question. I hear every face I've lost asking me if I still remember them, if I still believe they're more than just a story that ended." The crowd seemed to inhale all at once, the emotion in his words echoing their own unspoken fears. Somewhere in the back, someone dabbed at their eyes. On stage, Jimmy stared at him, breath held, knowing they had crossed into territory no writer's room had prepared him for. Keanu looked down at his hands, then back up with a fragile resolve, as if he'd finally decided to stop running from the question he'd been carrying for years. "I don't know what happens to us when we die," he said slowly, "but I do know one thing about the people we lose." He stopped there mid-sentence. The words caught in his throat as his jaw tightened and his fingers curled again, like whatever he was about to say might break him, or save him. "I don't know what happens to us when we die," he repeated, his voice steadier now, "but I do know one thing about the people we lose." He drew in a breath that seemed to come from somewhere far beneath his ribs. "They don't stop changing us." The sentence landed softly but carried a strange force, like a quiet wave knocking your feet out from under you. The audience didn't applaud. They just watched, eyes fixed on him as if any sound might break the fragile honesty of the moment. Jimmy's lips parted, but he didn't jump in with a follow-up. He could tell there was more coming, something deeper pushing its way to the surface. "When someone you love dies," Keanu continued, "the world tells you they're gone. That's it. End of story. But that's not what I feel." His gaze dropped to the floor, then climbed back to Jimmy with a vulnerability that made the set feel almost too small to hold it. "I feel them in the way I hesitate before I lose my temper. I feel them when I hold a door open or stop to listen to someone who's hurting. I hear their voices in my head when I'm about to give up, and they would have told me, "No, keep going." He gave a small, almost embarrassed laugh, like he wasn't used to exposing this much of himself. Maybe that sounds sentimental, but I think death changes the form of someone's presence, not the fact of it. Their body disappears. Their influence doesn't. If anything, it gets louder the more we learn to listen. A woman in the second row wiped a tear from her cheek. Jimmy's jaw clenched as he nodded slowly, not for the camera, but for himself. He knew this wasn't just about famous losses or tragic headlines. This was about parents, siblings, friends, strangers, all the people the audience had lost and carried quietly. Keanu shifted back in his chair, shoulders squaring as if he'd decided to stop apologizing for the depth of what he felt. "For a long time, I was angry," he admitted. "Angry at the universe, at fate, at whatever you want to call it. I couldn't understand how something so beautiful could just be taken. And when you sit in that anger long enough, it starts to eat away at the part of you that can still be kind." He looked over at Jimmy with a faint, pained smile. "I didn't want to become bitter. I've seen what bitterness does. It turns grief into a prison. So one day I asked myself a question I was afraid to ask. If the people I lost could see who I was becoming, would they be proud of me? Or would they feel like they died twice, once when they left and once when I stopped living?" The studio air thickened with that thought. Behind the cameras, a crew member lowered his headset for a moment, blinking hard. The bandleader stared down at his hands. This was no longer an interview. It was something closer to a confession shared with everyone listening. "I realized," Keanu said softly, "that I had a choice. I could let loss harden me, or I could let it open me up. I could use it as an excuse to give up on people, or as a reason to be gentler with every stranger I meet, because I have no idea what they've lost too." His tone sharpened, not with anger, but with conviction. "That's what I think happens when we die, at least part of it. We become the reason someone chooses compassion instead of cruelty, courage instead of surrender, humility instead of ego. Maybe that's not an afterlife in the religious sense, but it's a kind of continuation, a legacy written in the small decisions people make every day." Jimmy exhaled a breath he didn't know he was holding. "So you think," he said carefully, "that the dead live on in what we do, in how we treat each other?" Keanu nodded. "In who we decide to be because they existed." His voice grew quieter but more intense. "Every time I get back up after life knocks me down, I feel like I'm honoring them. Every time I choose kindness when it would be easier to be cold, that's them. Every time I walk into a set or a quiet room or a lonely night and think, just one more step, just one more day, I'm not walking alone. They're part of that step." The audience visibly absorbed this, eyes shining in the softened studio light. A few people exchanged glances that said, without words, "That's exactly how I feel, but I never knew how to say it." Jimmy leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his showman's mask completely gone. That's beautiful, man," he murmured. "But doesn't it scare you, knowing how much power grief has over who you become?" The question was honest, almost childlike, and it hung there with its own quiet weight. Keanu's gaze dropped again, his expression tightening. For a moment, he didn't answer. His throat moved as he swallowed something heavy back down. When he finally looked up, there was a new tension behind his eyes, like a door he hadn't planned on opening tonight was swinging wide on its own. "It scares me every day," he admitted, "because it doesn't just shape who I am. It almost destroyed me once." He stopped there, the sentence unfinished but heavy with implication. The crowd shifted, a murmur starting and dying in the same breath. Jimmy blinked, taken aback by the sudden darkness beneath those words, his mind racing with possibilities he wasn't sure he had the right to touch. Keanu's fingers tightened again, the knuckles pale as something unspoken pressed against the silence, demanding to be told. "It almost destroyed you," Jimmy repeated, the words coming out more as concern than curiosity. Keanu nodded slowly, eyes drifting to a point far beyond the cameras. "There was a night," he said, "years ago when everything felt hollow. I'd lost people I loved. Work didn't feel like enough. Applause felt like noise. I'd go home after a long day and the silence in my apartment was louder than any crowd I'd just left." His jaw clenched as he remembered. I was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, lights off, just empty. No movies, no interviews, no funny stories, just me and the feeling that nothing I did mattered, that the world would turn exactly the same with or without me. He swallowed. And I thought, if the people I've lost could see me now, what would they say? He paused, and the studio seemed to lean toward him. The audience held themselves perfectly still, as if movement might break the fragile thread he was pulling from his own life. In that moment, I had two voices in my head, he continued. One told me, stay down, you've done enough, let it all go. The other one was softer, but it wouldn't shut up. It said, get up, not for you, for us, for everyone who didn't get the chance to stand here and breathe this air one more time. His eyes glistened as he looked at Jimmy. That second voice felt like all the people I'd lost speaking together, not in some mystical way, more like all the love they had poured into me, refusing to disappear with them. Jimmy's eyes shone too now, his usual bright smile replaced by a look of naked empathy. A camera operator blinked hard, briefly pulling his eye from the viewfinder. In the audience, you could see people seeing themselves in that image. The dark room, the silent battle, the choice to get up or give in. So I made a deal with them that night, Keanu said. I said, all right, if I get up, it's not going to be about impressing the world anymore, it's going to be about honoring you. I will try every day to be someone you'd be proud of. I will mess up. I will fall apart sometimes, but I'll keep walking, for you. He took a slow breath, grounding himself back in the present. That was the night I realized resilience isn't some heroic, cinematic thing. It's ugly. It's you on the floor deciding to stand even when you don't see the point yet. Courage isn't fearlessness. It's doing the next small, kind thing while still scared, still broken. Jimmy leaned closer. What was the next thing you did after you made that deal? Keanu's lips curved into a small, shy smile. I stood up. I turned on the light, and I washed the dishes that had been piling up for days. The audience gave a soft, tender laugh, not mocking, but recognizing that strangely sacred ordinariness. I know that sounds trivial, he said, but in that moment washing those plates was an act of defiance, against giving up, against letting grief call all the shots. I thought, if I can do this one small thing, maybe I can do another tomorrow. That's how resilience starts, not with big speeches or big decisions, with one quiet decision not to quit. His expression softened, thoughtful. Over time, that decision grew into a way of living. I stopped asking, why did this happen to me? And started asking, what am I going to do with the time I still have? And the only answer that felt honest was, be kind, work hard, stay humble, help where you can, love people while you have them. The words sat in the air, deep and simple. Jimmy let them breathe before speaking again. So when you're sitting here now in front of all these people, he asked gently, do you still hear those two voices? The one that says, stay down, and the one that says, get up. Keanu looked around the studio at the lights, the cameras, the strangers who were suddenly not entirely strangers. Every day, he said, but the difference now is I'm not fighting them alone anymore. He hesitated for just a second, as if deciding whether to risk saying what came next. Because somewhere along the way, he added quietly, I realized I'm not the only one in that dark room, wondering if it's worth standing up again. The way he said it, the quiet tremor in his voice, made dozens of people in the room feel like he was talking directly to them, and countless more watching through their screens. And before anyone could break the spell with applause or a joke, Jimmy asked the question that took the conversation in an even more unexpected direction. What would you say, he asked, to someone watching right now who's in that room tonight? The studio fell completely silent again, as everyone waited to hear whether Keanu would turn away from that responsibility, or step directly into it. Keanu didn't answer right away. His eyes moved slowly across the crowd, but it was clear he was seeing beyond the studio, right into the invisible lives behind the cameras. The people watching on phones in dark bedrooms, on laptops in hospital waiting rooms, on TVs in living rooms that still held echoes of a voice that wasn't there anymore. If you're in that room tonight, he began softly, and you're tired, really tired, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix, first, I want you to know you're not weak. You're not broken beyond repair. You're not failing at life. You're just carrying something heavy that no one else can see. A few people in the audience wiped their eyes. Jimmy sat absolutely still, giving him space. "I don't have a magic answer," Keanu continued. "I'm not a therapist, I'm not a philosopher, I'm just a guy who's been on that floor thinking maybe it would be easier to let go. So all I can offer you is what helped me make the smallest promise you can keep. Not 'I'll be happy tomorrow.' That's too big. Maybe it's just, 'I'll eat something today. I'll step outside once. I'll send one message to someone I trust and say I'm not okay, but I'm here.'" His voice thickened, but he held it together. "And if you feel like you have no one to message, I want you to remember this. Right now, in this moment, there is a stranger in a suit on a stage and a guy in a chair with messy hair who are both genuinely glad you're still here to see this. You may not know us, but we're real. And the world is full of other people like us, people who would miss you if they knew you and you disappeared." The crowd exhaled all at once, a mix of sniffles and held back emotion. Jimmy's eyes shone openly now, lashes wet. "Courage," Keanu said, "is not pretending you're fine. It's saying, I'm not fine, but I'm willing to stay one more day and see if something small and good happens. And it will. It might be a kind barista, a song you forgot you loved, a stranger's smile, or maybe just the pride of knowing you kept that tiny promise to yourself. That's how you start building a life again. One small, honest promise at a time." He leaned back, his face gentling into a fragile, hopeful smile. "And to the people who have lost someone and feel like the pain will never end, I can't tell you it will go away because mine hasn't. But I can tell you it will change. One day the memories hurt a little less and warm you a little more. One day you'll laugh at a memory without feeling guilty for not crying. That's not you forgetting them. That's them finally smiling with you instead of through your tears." A murmur of emotion rippled through the audience. It wasn't applause yet, just the sound of people catching their breath after hearing words they'd needed for a long time. Jimmy cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. "You know," he said softly, "we book guests to make people laugh, to maybe distract them for a few minutes." He gestured around the set at the cameras and lights. "I wasn't expecting this." Keanu shrugged gently, humility returning to his features like a familiar coat. "Me neither," he said. "I thought we'd talk about stunts and memes." The audience chuckled softly. "But you asked a real question, and sometimes when someone gives you that kind of honesty, the kindest thing you can do is answer with your whole heart." Jimmy stared at him for a long moment, gratitude and awe written plainly across his face. Then he glanced at the audience, at the crew, back at Keanu. You could see a quiet realization settle on him. This wasn't just a good segment. It was something people might come back to on their worst days. He turned slightly toward the camera, then back to his guest. "You know this is going to live online forever, right?" Jimmy said gently. "People are going to replay this, maybe when they're in that dark room you talked about." Keanu gave a small, thoughtful nod. "Then I hope," he replied, "that when they do, they feel less alone, because that, more than anything, is what I think we owe each other while we're alive." The sincerity of that line brought the audience to the edge of applause, but something in the moment still felt unfinished, like there was one more truth hovering between them, waiting to be spoken. Jimmy looked at him, eyes soft. "You've talked a lot about what you owe the people you've lost," he said. "What do you think the world owes you after everything you've been through?" It was a bold question, the kind that could have sounded provocative in another context. Here, it felt like an invitation for one last, honest revelation. Keanu exhaled slowly, the question settling on him like a weight he'd never quite let himself measure. And then, with a small, almost shy smile, he answered in a way no one in the room was prepared for. "What does the world owe me?" Keanu repeated, tasting the words like he wasn't sure he believed in the idea at all. The audience went absolutely silent. Even the cameras seemed to lean in. He let the question sit for several long seconds. You could see him thinking, not about how to sound wise, not about how it would play as a clip, but about what was actually true for him. Finally, he shook his head lightly, a self-conscious smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Nothing," he said, with a quiet conviction that cut through the room. "The world doesn't owe me a single thing." The answer was so simple, so unexpected, that the audience actually gasped. Jimmy blinked, taken aback, not because it was a humble answer, but because it came from such a raw place. Keanu went on, "That's the trap, I think. When you believe the world owes you for your pain, you start keeping score. You start thinking, I suffered, so life has to make it up to me. And when it doesn't, the disappointment crushes you twice as hard. He lifted his shoulders in a small, resigned shrug. My losses are mine. My grief is mine. My responsibilities are mine. The world didn't promise me fairness. It didn't sign a contract saying I'd get a happy ending if I worked hard and was kind. So instead of asking what the world owes me, I try to ask, what can I give back before I go? There was a stunned stillness in the studio, the kind that usually only happens in churches or at funerals. But this wasn't about sadness. It was about something deeper, an acceptance that somehow felt freeing instead of hopeless. Jimmy frowned slightly, not in disagreement but in thought. So you don't think you deserve peace or happiness after everything? Keanu shook his head gently. I think we all deserve the chance to seek peace, he clarified. We all deserve safety, kindness, a hand to hold when things get hard, but I don't think the universe is a vending machine where you put in suffering and get happiness out. Life is random and fragile and sometimes brutally unfair. Waiting for it to make things right can keep you from seeing the small right things already happening around you. He smiled faintly, almost apologetically. Honestly, man, I feel like I've gotten more than I deserved already. I get to make movies. I get to meet people from all over the world. I get to sit here and talk about grief and courage and kindness on national television and have people actually listen. That's a lot. I'm grateful for that. Deeply. His humility wasn't showy. It felt real, the kind that's born from the knowledge of how quickly everything can vanish. So no, he added softly, the world doesn't owe me. If anything, I owe the world. I owe it to all the people who never got my chances to try and leave this place just a little bit gentler than I found it. Maybe that means treating the person making my coffee like they matter. Maybe it means talking about mental health and loss instead of pretending everything is fine. Maybe it means doing my job with love, even when it's just hitting a mark and saying a line. His voice warmed as he reached the heart of it. If I can do that, if I can turn my pain into something that makes someone else's day a little lighter, then the people I lost, they keep living through that, and that feels like enough, more than enough. For a moment, no one moved. No one clapped. The audience just absorbed it, that fierce combination of humility, courage, and quiet resolve. You could feel something shifting in the room, a shared understanding that this conversation had become bigger than a show, bigger than any one person. Then, slowly at first, hands came together. Not the wild, explosive applause of a punchline landed, but a rising wave of gratitude. People stood, first a few in the front row, then more, until the whole studio was on its feet, applauding not the celebrity, but the human being who had just laid his heart open in front of them. Jimmy stood too, emotion raw on his face. He stepped forward, breaking the invisible barrier between host and guest, and pulled Keanu into a hug. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't staged. It was two people holding on for a moment, sharing the weight of every loss, every quiet victory, every unseen battle their audience had ever fought. When they pulled apart, Jimmy's voice was rough. Thank you for saying yes to that question, he managed, and for staying with it when it got hard. Keanu gave that shy, boyish smile the world knew, but now it carried a different depth. Thank you for asking it, he replied. Most people are too scared to. Jimmy turned to the camera, but for once he struggled to find the usual upbeat sign-off. He looked back at Keanu, then back at the lens, and chose honesty over performance. If you're watching this at home, he said, voice steadying, and you're going through something, loss, loneliness, whatever it is, just know you're not alone. We're going to take a break, but maybe when this clip is over, send someone a message, or take that one small step he talked about. You deserve that chance, you really do. The band began to play a softer, more reflective tune than usual as the show moved toward commercial. But even as the music swelled, the image lingered. Two men on a brightly lit stage, surrounded by cameras and applause, holding a conversation that belonged more to the quiet corners of the human heart than to television. Back home in living rooms and bedrooms and hospital corridors, people paused the video. Some rewound it, some cried, some just sat in silence, feeling less alone than they had an hour before. And in all those scattered, private spaces, Keanu's simple, unpolished answer kept echoing. The world owes us nothing. But we owe each other kindness. We owe the people we've lost the courage to keep going. And we owe ourselves, no matter how dark the room we're in, the chance to stand up one more time and see what small, unexpected light tomorrow might bring.